Hello, I have the distinct pleasure to be introducing the first list on our brand new channel, Cultaholic. In fact, we'll be doing all sorts of lovely lists about wrestling, as well as WTF moments, predictions, reactions, punishments, news, live streams, and much, much more. Please subscribe. For our very first list, we're covering the real-life wrestling defections. You know, when wrestlers leave one company that they were working for and go to work for another company, hoping that in doing so they make more of the stuff that they actually love. Not sure why we've chosen this as our first list, to be honest. It's a bit out of the blue. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic.com, and here are the top 10 most shocking real-life defections in wrestling history. Join us. Number 10. Hulk Hogan. The ethically dubious pile of corned beef that is Hulk Hogan has done a number of shocking things in his career, turning heel and forming the NWO, speaking of Defections, High, Hall and Nash, showing up in TNA, releasing a sex tape with some behind-the-scenes bonus material that totally got into a racial place. But before any of those, Hogan rocked the wrestling world in June 1994 by cutting his retirement from wrestling short and signing with WCW. 10 years after old Tezza won the WWF title and put in one of the most lucrative decades of service with a wrestling promotion in the history of time, after Vince had broadcast Hulkamania to the world and made Hogan a global phenomenon, Hulk signed with Vince's biggest competition. Coupled with the steroid trial, 1994 was possibly the worst year of Vince McMahon's life, except maybe that year he hung around with the Spirit Squad. How did the defection work out? Hogan ruled the main event and made millions before WCW collapsed. Number 9. Brock Lesnar. Speaking of people for whom Vince invested millions of dollars in making them a household name, only for them to turn around, present their arse and say, feel free to kiss anywhere but the hole, let's talk about Vanilla's revenge, Brock Lesnar. The next big thing was precisely that. Vince fell in love with the Minnesotan boy's freakish stature, uncanny athleticism, and eat the sun's scary charisma. He strapped the rocket to Brock, let's go ahead and call it a brocket, and gave the monster a monster push. Brock won the WWE title 4 months after debuting, won it again in the following WrestleMania's main event, and looked set to become the face of the company for the next decade. Except that Brock Lesnar, like most mountains, didn't want to travel, and at the peak of his popularity, at his most marketable and glorious, said "See ya" to Vince and went out to try for the Minnesota Vikings. How did the defection work out? Brock was a bust in football, but apparently he did quite well for himself in the UFC. Number 8. Mike Awesome. Hey, let's talk about One Night Stand 2005 when JBL beat up the Blue Men. No, I kid. But we are actually talking about that event. If you've watched that show and wondered during the Masato Tanaka vs Mike Awesome match why it seems like Joey Styles hates Big Mike for real, then wonder no more. Mike Awesome was ECW champion in 2000 and had been a big deal in that company for a year. Owing to a dispute with Paul Heyman over unpaid wages, Awesome jumped ship to WCW, appearing on an episode of Nitro in April, which was surprising, because he was still ECW champion at the time. That defection gave rise to one of the weirdest periods in the ECW championship's history. Awesome, who is now working for WCW, appeared on an ECW show wrestling Extreme veteran Taz, who worked for WWF at the time. Awesome dropped the belt to Taz, who dropped it a week later to Tommy Dreamer, who dropped it within the hour to Just Incredible. How did Mike Awesome's defection work out? 3 words. Fat chick thriller. And speaking of weird time with belts, 3 years before Hulk Hogan, the walking symbol of WWF for a decade, crossed over to WCW, Ric Flair, the walking symbol of the NWA and WCW, crossed over to the WWF. Jim Herd was executive vice president of WCW at the time and making all sorts of smart decisions, like wanting to demote the most popular champion of the 80s, change his hair, name and gimmick, and then lower his pay, forcing him to quit while champion. Flair, who had cumulatively held the belt, or a version of it, for over 3,000 days, absconded with the goddamn belt, appearing on WWF programming with it. Imagine if Steve Austin had appeared on Nitro with a WWF Winged Eagle. Your brain would have melted. How did the defection work out? Flair wasn't utilised as well as he'd hoped and jumped ship back to WCW in 1993, after smart man Jim Herd had been ousted, obviously. Number 6. Pro Wrestling Noah. While New Japan Pro Wrestling rules the Japanese roost, Pro Wrestling Noah has developed a tidy reputation for top-shelf wrestling since its formation in 2000. How it formed is an interesting story. In the 90s, All Japan Pro Wrestling was a big deal, promoted and run by a literal big deal, Giant Baba. In Japan, Baba was an Andre the Giant level of nationally beloved novelty attraction. Under Baba's lead, All Japan was a big success, but when he died in '99, his widow took over as owner. After a year of poor management, Mitsuhara Misawa, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time and a huge All Japan legend, left the promotion and took all but 4 of the wrestlers with him, which is something of a power play. Misawa then folded a new promotion, Pro Wrestling Noah, get it, Exodus, finding a new promised land, get it. How did the defection work out? Noah is still going today, although a recent falling out with New Japan has seen several of its stars leave them and return to New Japan. What an industry. Number 5. Rick Rude. The ravishing one always knew how to make an entrance, leaving Sweathogs fuming as he showed off abs that launched 1,000 mums off the sofa. Rude also managed what no wrestler has been able to do since, being on WCW, ECW and WWF television all in the same week. WWF and ECW had shared some talent in 1997, which explains Rude's appearance on Hardcore TV, but the WCW defection is much spicier. Furious over the Montreal screwjob, Rude hammered out a deal with Eric Bischoff to sign with WCW. On November the 17th, Rude had appeared live on WCW Nitro, shooting on WWF with his trademark moustache. So far so good. However, an hour later, Rude appeared on a pre-taped Raw is War with a full beard. He appeared on Nitro and Raw on the same goddamn night. How did the defection work out? He left WCW after 16 months and died weeks later. Number 4, Alundra Blaze. Alundra Blaze basically was the WWF women's division in the mid-90s. Supremely capable and beautiful, she held the women's title for over 500 days across the 2 years it was active in the WWF. Vince then came to terms with Blaze leaving and deactivated the belt because, well, his women's division had just walked out. Days later, Blaze appeared on WCW, calling herself Medusa once more, before dropping the title in a trash can in one of the first major statements of the Monday Night Wars. How did the defection work out? Blaze was blacklisted from WWF for over a decade for the stunt, but she ended up in the Hall of Fame. Number 3, Jeff Jarrett and Vince Russo. Upping the stakes from Medusa's FU, Double J and Vince Russo bent Vince McMahon over and paddled his bottom before they left. Russo and Jarrett were super best friends and conspired to make their departure for WCW as lucrative as possible. Russo made the first move, signing with WCW on October 5th, 1999. Jarrett then opted not to renew his WWF contract, which expired days before No Mercy 2 weeks later. Jarrett, thanks in no small part to Russo's booking, was Intercontinental Champion at the time, and threatened to no-show No Mercy and take the belt to WCW if he wasn't paid a stupid amount of money. And when I say stupid, Jarrett was paid $300,000 to drop the title at No Mercy before jumping ship. How did the defection work out? Jarrett was a major player in Russo's WCW, obviously, and also obviously will never work for Vince McMahon again. Number 2, Lex Luger. Say what you want about some of the kick to the balls defections on this list, at least the promoters knew they were going to happen ahead of time. Lex's defection was the worst kick in the balls possible. It was the stealth kick to the balls. That's the kind of kick to the balls that changes you, that haunts your children's dreams. Lex's contract with the WWF ran out and Eric Bischoff made him an offer he couldn't refuse. One condition of the deal? Vince couldn't know about it. Lex Luger worked a house show on September the 4th in New Brunswick for WWF, got on a plane and made Vince and company crap their pants when he appeared on the very first episode of WCW Monday Nitro the very next night. Good God, the Monday Night Wars were exciting. How did the defection work out? He was a feature player for WCW until they closed their doors and recently appeared on WWE Network on shows like Countdown, so bridges have been mended. Number 1. No, it's not Hall and Nash, it's everyone Vince McMahon stole in the 80s. Seeing as Vince has been on the receiving end of a lot of these defections, it only seems fair to end with this one. In the early 80s, after getting his hands on his dad's company, Vince McMahon broke every taboo in the wrestling industry by raiding pretty much every significant national promotion and offering their biggest stars huge money to defect and join the WWF super family. Hogan and Bobby Heenan poached from the AWA, Savage from Continental Wrestling, Junkyard Dog and Ted DiBiase from Mid-South, Roddy Piper from Georgia Championship Wrestling, Ricky Steamboat from Jim Crockett Promotions, and the list goes on. How did these defections work out? They built an empire that is still going strong to this day. I've been Adam Pachisi from Cultaholic.com and that was our list. Do you agree? Let us know in the comments below and don't forget, join us.